We're going to look at some of the constitutional compromises done at the Constitutional Convention. First one we're going to look at is the 3/5 compromise. So the 3/5 compromise is all about representation. Again, the idea of representation being so important to the states. And so the issue at hand here is, how are we going to deal with all the blacks in the South? Up until this point, the southern states insisted that blacks were property, slaves were property, and that they're not people. And so now the North is saying, well, if they are property and not people, they should not count in your census towards the number of representatives you're going to get in the House of Representatives. And now the South is saying, no, we should be able to count them for purposes of representation. And so the compromise is that for every 5 blacks, they will count as 3. So for every 5 slaves that you have, we will allow you to count those as 3. So that is the 3/5 compromise. We're going to count 3 slaves or 3 people for every 5 slaves that you own. The commerce and slave trade, that should be commerce and slave trade compromises. Sorry about that. So we have a situation where you have northern states that are industrial, manufacturing, factories, and in the southern states it's more agricultural. And so agricultural, both of these are making and selling and transporting, importing and exporting. And so the North wants taxes on imports and taxes on exports, and allowing Congress to regulate the slave trade. The southern states want taxes on things coming into the United States or imports, and then they do not want any taxes on exports, but they also don't want any regulations on the slave trade. And so what the compromise ends up being is that Congress can tax imports. So anything coming into the United States, Congress can place a tax on that. But there won't be any taxes on exports. So anything leaving the United States and going to other countries, we won't put a tax on it here. And then it allows for the slave trade to continue on for 20 years. So they're not allowed to touch the slave trade for 20 years. After that, in 1808, the very first moment that we can, or that Congress can outlaw the slave trade, they do that in 1808. And then the last compromise we're going to talk about is the compromise on the how are we going to elect and how do we elect the president. So the 2 suggestions before the Electoral College is to allow for Congress, or our legislative branch, to pick who they want to be president, or to allow all the people in a popular election. Just allow everyone to vote, and whoever wins gets to be president. The Founding Fathers were leery of both of those. We don't want the legislative branch to have that much control over the executive. So we want them to be independent. We want the executive to be independent and equal to the legislative branch. But there also is a concern in 1787, when we're writing the Constitution, that people are not very either educated. A lot of people couldn't read at this time. They live in remote areas where they don't have any information. There's not access to newspapers for a lot of these people. Some are uninterested. So, the president, this new executive, is too important of a position to just allow your average citizen to vote for them. So what they decided was to create what we call the Electoral College. And the numbers on each one of these states represent the number of votes each state gets towards president. So what would take place is everyone in Indiana would get to vote for who they thought were the smartest people in their communities, and then those people would be allowed to actually cast a vote on who they thought was to be president. So it was never intended that people were to vote for the president, but we would pick the smartest people from our state, and then we would allow those people to discuss and debate amongst themselves, and then allow those people. So Indiana would have 11 people, 11 electors, who was responsible for choosing who they thought would be the best person for president. You can see Florida down here. Florida would have 29 people who were responsible for doing that. And Texas would get 38. California would get 55. So we're not going with the popular vote. We're not going to allow everyone to vote, again, because they're either uninformed, uneducated, uninterested. And then we also don't want the legislature to pick, because we don't want our executive to be under the thumb or under the control. So we elect electors who are going to do that.